When people leave comments on my videos, it's surprising how often they tell me their age, right at the start. It makes me smile because of the way British newspapers always introduce people in stories by their name, age and occupation. Lee King, 37, plumber. Neil Ithick, 68, retired paleontologist. Superfluous, 36, unemployed. If you ever read the Daily TISM, they parody those newspapers to amazing effect. If you haven't, there's a link down below. But it's quite typical for someone to open their comment by telling me their age, both now and when they were diagnosed or self-identified as being autistic. I'm not the only one to notice that trend, and not only on my channel, leading some very analytical autistic viewers to notice patterns emerging. In the past year or two, I've found the question coming up over and again. How come so many people in their 30s and 40s are realising they're autistic these days? Earlier in this series, I talked about some of the reasons so many adults don't find out they're autistic until later in life. But I didn't talk about why they do. I'm Quinn, and I'm autistic. And today on Autismatic, let's find out where this millennial autism bubble came from. I've been learning about autism through study and just being autistic ever since I was diagnosed 40 years ago, and I share some of what I've picked up along the way here on Autismatic. In the first of these Tales of the Undiagnosed, I talked about the 3 biggest reasons why so many autistic adults didn't find out they were autistic when they were kids. I concentrated on those factors that could potentially affect anyone at all, rather than any that are specific to certain groups. I'll be talking about the impact of gender, location, race, finance, and other barriers in another video. What we're talking about today isn't how people go about getting diagnosed or self-identifying, nor about the pros and cons of getting formally diagnosed in the first place. The focus today is on what brought them here in the first place. What changed in their lives or their hearts that started them wondering? Something turned them from an ordinary Joe or Joanna, someone who regarded themselves as being just like everyone else, into someone who believes they're autistic. So what was it? Just in case anyone who is self-identified feels a little bit uncomfortable with that last sentence, allow me to elaborate. With a few exceptions, every one of us who describes ourselves as autistic believes we're autistic. We're 100% certain for ourselves that autistic or our preferred variant is a valid description of who we are. We all have that in common, whether we have a formal diagnosis or not. We all identify significantly with the communication, emotional and sensory differences of autism and the life outcomes they lead to. Having a formal diagnosis doesn't make someone more autistic than a self-ID'd autist, or more relevant to the conversation. Not around here, at least. Diagnosis means that in addition to our own certainty, we have a third-party agreement, which carries some official weight, but we know they can occasionally be wrong too. There's all sorts of general and individual-specific reasons why someone may or may not pursue a formal diagnosis, but for the purposes of this little chat about how people make those first connections between themselves and autism, whether or not they intend to go on to get it rubber-stamped later doesn't really matter. And to have a little fun with it, all these examples come from real people, even if I've changed the names. Heather here is from one of our biggest groups. Heather started to think she might be autistic when her daughter Esme was referred for autism diagnosis, and things started to sound very close to home. The autism diagnosis process is still sadly based more on observation and what other people think than it is about what goes on inside our heads. So she was expected to offer her perspective on all the problem behaviours Esme's school had identified to her. Trouble was, Heather kept on wondering what the problems actually were. As far as she was concerned, most of these challenging behaviours they told her about were just everyday kids will be kids kind of stuff. Until, that is, she started telling her other half about what was being said to her at the appointments. Heather, you know I love you both, but some things you think are normal just aren't, for either you or Esme. Perhaps there's a reason for that. Sometimes an exchange like that leads to arguments, accusations, and recrimination, even the end of relationships. But in Heather's case, it was the spark that led her to self-discovery and onto the very special bond Esme and Heather have now. Joshua, not Josh, is from the other largest group. Joshua realised he might be autistic when it dawned on him that his closest friend at work and his best bud in his personal life were both autistic, and they have a lot in common with each other and with him. It aroused his curiosity enough to start looking into it further online, passing by one of my videos and leaving a comment on the way. He didn't really believe he might be autistic when he started out, but the more he looked, the more clicked with him, until he realised that this might just be the answer to questions that had nagged at him all his life. It seemed to help explain a few too many of the times in his life that everything had appeared to fall apart for no good reason. Joshua represents all those folks who started looking because of someone close to them. It might be a family member, a friend, a romantic partner, somebody they spend quite a bit of time with. Joshua's may have known all along that this person was autistic, or they could have only recently found out for themselves. It doesn't really matter. What's important is that right now Joshua and others like him realise he might be autistic, because he related better to the people in his life that he knew to be autistic than pretty much everyone else. Daniel's moment of clarity came after realising he had way too much in common with a couple of his new clients at the bank he worked at as a small business advisor. He didn't really like his job much, but it paid his bills and it gave him plenty of time in between clients to read and to think. Most of these clients seemed to want the same things anyway, so the job ceased to keep his interest for him quite a while back, until he met these two, a couple of days apart. Neither of the clients knew each other, but they were so much alike he genuinely wondered if they might be related and not even know it. He was utterly hopeless with faces anyway, so they could be brothers and he might not even notice. He joked about it to a colleague, who pointed out that those clients were just as likely to be related to Daniel as each other. They were so much like him. He felt a bit strange about that at first, because it sounded to him like his co-worker was teasing him, rather than making an honest observation. He'd seen how the autistic kids at school had been mercilessly tortured by his own friends, so he wasn't exactly keen on thinking of himself like that. But still, both those new clients were really nice people, and quite honestly, he got more sense out of them in 5 minutes than his last year's worth of clients, which got him wondering. Is it really that bad to be autistic? Because those clients didn't think so, and he really liked them both. Isobel found out she was autistic after seeking help for her depression. She'd suffered frequent bouts of depression for as long as she could remember, but it wasn't until her early 20s that a doctor finally understood what she was trying to tell them and prescribed her something to help. The drugs did help her at first. They were a literal lifesaver at the time she got them because she was at her wit's end, a pretty common state of being these days, but the doctor got to her in time, and a couple of months of antidepressants had got her mood into a more stable place. There were drawbacks, though, and so she spent several years trying to find ways of lightening her load without drugs, which of course led her to counselling. When her counsellor asked her, "Have you ever given any thought to the possibility you might be autistic?" she went away confused at first. She'd heard of autism, but it couldn't apply to her. If she was autistic, she'd have been special needs at school, so it must be nonsense. Who did a counsellor think she was, telling her she's wrong in the head? She got angry about it and cancelled her next 2 counselling appointments with lame excuses. But in the end, she knew that if she failed to attend a 3rd time, her place might get withdrawn. So, she figured she'd go along for the next one, but insist the counsellor explain herself. An hour, and 1 box of tear-sodden tissues later, she accepted the offer of a referral for autism assessment. Arabelle, on the other hand, found their way here without professional guidance. They went down the same route of being diagnosed with depression and taking the tablets as Isobel did, but they didn't receive counselling. For many of the Arabelles of the world, it's because they simply can't afford it. Whilst there are charities in most countries that do their best to plug the gaps left by governments, access to quality mental health care is still largely hidden behind a paywall, at least if you want it quickly when it'll do the most good. Whether it's lack of funds or institutional apathy and waiting lists that stand in the way doesn't matter though. What's important is that Arabelles can't or don't want to go through the rest of their lives medicated, so they seek help elsewhere. They went searching online for material about their problems, looking for other people in the same boat who might offer understanding or even practical solutions. The more they looked for stuff about depression, anxiety, communication barriers, gaslighting, victim blaming, fawn response, and more, the more frequently links with the word autistic or autism popped up, until eventually they clicked one. Then another. They didn't realise that all those things they were looking at had autism in common, until they started looking. But they do now. Arabelle is our example of a growing segment of our community. There's a lot of Arabelles who've commented on my videos in the last year or two. Most of them don't know why they've started seeing autism videos in their YouTube feed or on their social media, because they've not searched for it. They knew very little about it before and weren't interested to know, but the gods of the algorithms keep serving them up autism content until they eventually give in and click on a link. It feels almost spooky, as if some unseen hand was guiding them here, to tempt them with unsought answers for questions they'd never even dreamed of asking. But that's not what's happening. Whether we like it or not, no matter how many firewalls, ad blockers, VPNs and sock puppet accounts we've put in place, it's difficult to avoid the algorithm gods these days, especially where there's money to be made. I had to replace my office chair recently, after my old one broke. I ended up getting a cheap interim replacement from Amazon because, well, reasons. But whilst I was choosing, I looked at a few different brands of office chairs at various price points. From the first day I searched, right up to now, I've been getting constant adverts on YouTube and sidebars on websites for Booley's branded office chairs. If I watch YouTube for an hour, I'll see the same Booley's ad 3 or 4 times. And you know the strange thing? I hadn't once looked up that brand before the ad started popping up, but the algorithmic deities had seen that I'd shown an interest in office furniture and they were paying for ads, so they jumped at the opportunity. Now, take a look at this. And this. How about these? These keep getting advertised to me as well, but I'm not a plumber, a heating engineer, or even an architect. Got no particular interest in domestic heating systems, so why are the sidebars of my web pages filled with adverts for radiators, pipe elbows, thermostats, and high-pressure steam valves? Oh, hang on. I think it might be this. I play video games to relax and be entertained, and this is my preferred way to play these days. This is the handheld gaming PC that changed the conversation in PC gaming when it first came out about 2 years ago. It's called a Steam Deck, and it's made by a company called Valve. In fact, if you're at all interested in gaming on a PC, then you'll know about the biggest online gaming platform of all, Steam, and its parent company, Valve, and all their games. A few months ago, I used Google to search for something about my version of the Steam Deck, and I had to narrow the search by adding Valve to the search terms. That's why I keep getting links for plumbing and heating supplies. Google thinks I'm interested in steam valves because of a search I did about video games. Try it for yourself. Google isn't the only one, but it's probably the easiest one to get a quick result. Think of something you wouldn't normally show much of an interest in and look it up online after the video. Make sure you click on a couple of links, especially product links, and then sit back and watch, as not only the ads on all the websites you visit, but the video ads and the content that gets recommended to you on YouTube will start to feature whatever it is you search for. If it feels like you're being shown random links about autism, ADHD, or neurodiversity, it's quite feasible that you're entirely right about never having looked it up. Might even be able to squeeze it as far as likely. But there will be a reason for it, even if it doesn't jump out at you at first. If you follow those recommendations, you'll probably work out why you're seeing content like that. You did show an interest, but you didn't know it at the time. You may not have realised that over a period of time you searched for or showed an interest in things connected to autism, but the algorithms noticed. You didn't realise that by searching for, say, anxiety, shock therapy, Sir Anthony Hopkins and Borat a couple of days apart, that they all had a connection to autism. But the routines that run the internet did. So it's giving you the opportunity to find out more. That's how search and recommend algorithms work, broadly speaking. Their recommendations are personalised to you and your interests based mainly on what you search for and what you click on. That's what those cookies you keep on having to consent to are for. If you keep seeing links to autism stuff and you ignore it, eventually it'll go away and you'll only be bothered occasionally. But you didn't, did you? Or you wouldn't be watching this now. Remember that this is a specific age group I'm talking about here today, those we call millennials. If I was to make the same video about my own Generation X or the boomers who preceded us, then a lot of this would apply, but that picture is slightly different and worth a video of its own. This isn't an exhaustive list either. I haven't covered everything, just the most common themes I come across. It's just such a shame that when someone asks us that question, what makes you think you're autistic? It's so often from behind a mask of anger, disbelief, or ridicule. Both as little old me in my private life and as the guy behind this channel, I've always been as accepting of self-identified folks as I have others with a diagnosis like myself. Just because they haven't got that official third party to agree with them yet, whether they intend to seek diagnosis in the future or not, I don't regard their needs or difficulties as any less than mine or any other autists. Almost all of us know what those frosty denial reactions look like when we try to tell people why we seem different, and it's even harder if we don't have that diagnosis golden ticket to prove it at the time. People start either trying to convince us we're mistaken or just take the mickey, sometimes both. Whilst they're performing mental gymnastics to square the circle you're presenting them with against their preconceptions and often quite skewed idea of what autistic means. Their internal mechanisms whirring 19 to the dozen whilst "does not compute" echoes in their minds. Many of us know exactly what's going on though, because the same gears started whirring in our own heads when we first began to realise we might actually be autistic, something we may have barely understood before that moment. Far too many people we might share it with choose to fixate on the label, though. And that's one of the reasons channels like this exist. To give those folks something to bridge their knowledge gap and help them understand the real people and lives behind that label. On slow news days, the news media wheel out their standby stories about rising numbers of neurodivergent diagnoses, of an autism epidemic, of the escalating cost of special needs services and the ever-present undercurrent of resentment at the preferential treatment everyone seems to think we get. It's presented as somehow both an insoluble mystery and an obvious indictment of the ills of society simultaneously. Yet seems to miss out on the screamingly obvious reasons why people might be identifying as or getting diagnosed as autistic. Almost every late diagnosed autist I've met has in some way described a life of constantly being told the world works in a way that never worked for them. Everyone else seems to be merrily getting on with life and making sense of it, whilst we sat on the sidelines doing our best to look like we knew what was going on, in a constant state of anxiety, with occasional forays into panic and sadness. Then, one day, we encountered someone who seems to get things like we do. And for the first time, the social 2 and 2 finally starts to look like it might add up to 4 at last. Things start to make sense, and we begin to unravel the mystery of our life so far. This is a scary and confusing world we all live in these days, with very few exceptions. Even the people who think they're winning act like they could lose everything at any minute, so imagine what it's like for neurodivergent folks who often have even less of a clue what's behind the madness. Most of those people who are finding out they're autistic in their 30s and 40s only made that discovery because they went looking for help, whether for themselves or someone they care about. They didn't go looking to be autistic. They found out by accident because they or someone close to them was struggling already. If there weren't so many people struggling to cope or feeling lost in the world, if there were less lonely, unhappy people, less victims of bullies, less casualties of inadequate education systems, less wrongful convictions of people who can't express themselves well or who look shifty, less intolerance of the different, less I'm all right, Jack, less dog eat dog, and a little more Good Samaritan, then there might not be so many people seeking answers in the first place. I'm Quinn, and I'm autistic. Thank you for watching. I told my diagnosis story in full in this video I did a few weeks ago, if you're interested to find out more. But I'm certainly interested in your story, so please go ahead and share it in the comments, as many have before. It's not only me who reads those comments, and it's surprising how much difference a single echo of recognition can make to someone's life. It doesn't matter how you got here, only that it's where you belong and you got here in the end. Before I go, just a quick reminder that I'm working on creating an online community outlet for my viewers to enjoy and share on. It has to be something outside of the regular social media channels to meet all the requirements of safety and accessibility, so I'm looking for anyone who could advise me or help me get it off the ground. There's already a few of you got in touch via this email address, which you'll also find in the channel info and in the description, but I'm still on the lookout for more input, so please get in touch if you can help. And, as of today, if you want to send anything in to me, you can, because the Autismatic PO Box has just gone live this week. So, if you've got anything you'd like me to take a look at, feature on the channel, or just want to share with me or other viewers, the address is on screen now and in the description. If you've already liked and subscribed and would like to support the channel more, then please follow the Patreon links in the description to pledge what you feel is fair and affordable to help keep the lights on here and the content keep flowing.